Hey everybody, Marcus here. I have something special for everyone today. For the second time in my 11 years on YouTube, I'll be conducting a book review. The author of this book, Aenga Besceawung, is a member of the MGTOW community. This, well, in itself makes this book interesting from an origins point of view. It's a philosophical work in nature entitled Contemplations, A Different Path to the Sacred. Now, this review is sponsored, so let's just get that out of the way. But now that we do, let's get started. Contemplations is a curious work. At times it takes the form of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and at times it's similar to St. Augustine's Confessions. But most of the time, however, it can be analogized as a, well, Dungeons and Dragons player's handbook to life, which in itself is pretty interesting. Now, the work is heavily influenced by Nietzsche and, well, existential thinking in general. It is, I would say, a modern work in this way. Now, the work itself runs in two parallel streams of thought. Firstly, the author lays out a framework from which one may build their own belief system. And secondly, leveraging his own framework, Aenga provides exposition of the belief systems he crafts for himself as an individual. Which again makes this book interesting because both the master and the teacher is one. Now, the scope of the book is vast, yet I believe there's a single problem the book is attempting to solve on behalf of the reader, namely the problem of nihilism. As we dive deeper into the author's thoughts, it should become apparent that the work is constructed from a modernist point of view. Now, this work is heavily influenced by Nietzsche, as stated, and Nietzsche's influence necessarily carries with it the problem that a post-religious view would, well, face modern man, nihilism being the key problem here. The author is doing exactly this throughout the text, attempting to craft a solution to nihilism, firstly, for himself, followed by an extrapolation of the general rules to this solution, culminating in a framework others can follow to tackle nihilism in their own lives. Now, this is actually quite an ambitious project, considering the problem of nihilism, well, it's not an easy nut to crack. And the scope of contemplations is too big to allow for a systematic treatise, as one would expect. As such, many claims are asserted as opposed to systematically defended. This may be jarring at times, considering the claims made can be, well, significant, but I believe such a side effect was inevitable given the length of the work. As such, one must read Contemplations as a holistic work, its validity leaning towards a coherentist approach to epistemological justification as opposed to, well, a foundationalist approach. But maybe some of his words will help us. So, the author writes, "To fully understand both your own path in life, as well as the path of others, choose to take including their tastes and thereby their motives or intentions, you must understand the perspective of the individual. And each individual's perspective is founded on a personal cosmology, which I am using here to mean broadly, an ontological foundation, an understanding of what it means to exist, which informs a worldview as opposed to merely thoughts of the origin of reality." This is marked on page 3, so the book starts off pretty strong, pretty heavy. Now, the book begins by establishing a baseline of 4 potential worldviews upon which one may begin to craft their own belief system. The author establishes his own terms for these 4 worldviews, and I have roughly mapped them into terms that are used in common parlance for the sake of this review. There is exposition for each within the book, giving more clarity as to what the author means, but I'm going to basically try to summarize it into language we might be more familiar with. The first is that of the world architect. This maps roughly to the theistic worldview, one governed by a god of one sort or another. The automatic worldview is the second, which roughly maps to materialism and therefore atheism. The third, the dramatic image, which roughly maps to pantheism. And finally, the living world, which seems to bear, well, similarities to Spinoza's metaphysics and objective idealism with materialistic tendencies. And this final worldview is also atheistic in nature. Aenga describes the living world as follows. The living world views the universe, or nature, as an organism-like system which manifests through regular patterns and cycles in which all of existence lives and dies, making up an ecosystem, including what we consider living entities as well as inanimate objects. It may have a mythological cause and it may have a historical cause. However, both are ancillary to the understanding of the world. Now, I give specific focus on this living world hypothesis because the remainder of the book, well, it builds on top of it, so we kind of need a good understanding of what he's talking about. Hence, here we can derive a few conclusions about contemplations. Firstly, it is fundamentally an atheistic work, and therefore any systems built on top of it will necessarily benefit and suffer from the arguments leveled at this sort of ontology. Secondly, in its role as a guidebook to life, any belief system that can be built on top of the principles the author presents will also necessarily be atheistic, and many atheists consider themselves spiritual. Well, there does not appear to be any conflict with Aenga's starting point in a spiritual mode of life, as the concepts of spirituality is usually defined individualistically, so there's no friction here. Now, I believe this is worth pointing out because it gives you an idea of where the boundaries of the work are carved out. This is not so much a shortcoming as it is a narrowing of the scope that the author has taken. Now, I can take this review in any number of directions. Topically, it is worth noting the major sections of this work, which I will, at a pretty rapid pace, however. And I will give particular focus to two sections that will interest people the most, I think. Firstly, the concept of the sacred, and secondly, the moral system constructed in contemplations. Now, before we deep dive into those two areas, let us give a rundown of the sections themselves. The book is broken down into two parts, and part one focuses on the worldviews, well, as I have discussed so far. It then devotes a large body of text in exposition to the concept of the sacred and the profane. Further, the book dives into the four values the author considers, which are fundamentally, from his writings, stability, equality, freedom, and chaos. And part one closes off with commentary related to culture and the presence of what has been set up to that point, well, within culture itself. So that kind of rounds out part one. While part two of the book I see as being broken up into complementary subsections. The first being a detailed breakdown of the moral system the author wishes to construct, while the remainder of the book gives exposition of downstream consequences of this moral system as it plays out in everyday life. Everyday life as in, well, things we'd be familiar with, like marriage, family, friendships, and so on. So it has a pragmatic dimension to it. Now, the very last section is a Marcus Aurelius style set of maxims, which I think are pretty neat. They're worth reading, though they are original to the author. Now, the lion's share of the book, therefore, rests in discourse around the sacred and profane of section 1, followed by the discourse on ethics in section 2. So let us tackle each of these sections individually. Firstly, we need to address the fact that the concept of the sacred and the profane originate from the works of Mircea Eliade's 1987 book entitled The Sacred and the Profane, The Nature of Religion. Eliade, in turn, drew from Rudolf Otto's 1917 book entitled The Idea of the Holy. Now, Aenga, as a stylistic choice, does not cite any of the authors from which he draws his ideas from. Having asked Aenga why this was, he informed me that he would rather the ideas stand on their own as opposed to the attributions that would come from the appeal to authority one would make with citations. Now, this is not particularly unusual, and in many cases, I do believe this actually makes more sense than citing the origins, as there are places where, well, there are significant deviations from the source material. So, I think it's okay. However, the language in Contemplations tends to identify the origins of the ideas pretty readily most of the time. If you've done any meaningful reading on philosophy, I think you're going to figure out where these ideas come from. So, the sacred and the profane. This is probably my favorite section of the book. Its applicability is broad and harkens back to things that Plato wrote in say, the Republic. However, we ought to explain these concepts in some rudimentary way before commenting further. Now, Aenga writes, "The sacred is a clearly defined order in the world. The sacred leads you to and may be a knowable set of principles and concepts which allow you to make meaningful changes and find value in your life. The sacred is like a beacon of light in the darkness, or as a safe harbor on the tempestuous seas of chaos where you feel lost. The sacred and its expressions are always there to allow you to reground yourself in meaning and guide you to a place of stability." Pretty powerful stuff. And in juxtaposition, the profane is, well, quote, "The profane are those elements of life which we describe as being normal, as they do not hold the same value as those things which we have recognized as sacred or providing a sacred experience. And they do not follow a structured order informed by cosmology, which provides value." Page 24, only on page 24. Now, we must continue to hold in mind that we read these words as an atheistic work, and consequent to that, religious language which may appear in the text is never theistic, but functional. We see the tendency of people to make sacral all sorts of things in their life, well, as a product of identity formation. And when my own identity was anchored in heavy metal in my teenage years, metal music was sacred, as were the objects used to create it, such as, well, guitars. There were sacred places like the Wacken Open Air Metal Festival, the mecca of heavy metal fans for decades and I guess still is today. But so too were acts sacred, such as headbanging, moshing. Long hair, of course, was also sacred. Wearing black band shirts, leather jackets, and patches were manifestations of sacred clothes. There were holy bands like, of course, Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, and Judas Priest. There were heroes like Dio, Bruce Dickinson, Ozzy Osbourne, and for me personally, Kai Hansen from Halloween, and other musicians like Michael Romeo, for example. To a metal fanatic, spiritual life had an organizational dimension around metal. Going to concerts was like going to church, yet no one could attribute metal fandom as religious in the strict sense of the word. So, Aenga desires to paint the sacred and the profane in such a light, the way I've painted it so far. A man finds clarity and meaning through interacting with the sacred. Absent the sacred in one's life leaves the man in a state of a meaningless material void. So ultimately, sacred objects, events, people, and places emerge, well, from a mythic origin. Aenga writes, "The term myth or mythical is not being used here to mean a story which is necessarily true, but an account which constructs a set of concepts of many levels and ideas layered and intermingled with one another, which describe the way the sacred and the profane worlds, as they are understood, came and come into being, a mythic origin of the world." The author encourages the reader, as part of the construction of a personal belief system, to identify the fundamental myth or myths that will stamp their presence of the sacred into their own lives. The nature of the myth, well, it matters less, and its existence in the life of the person. Without the myth, all of being, well, becomes profane, and the world offers no meaning or guidance to one's actions. Hence, sacral things are important to meaning, to oneself, and one's finding of meaning. This, I believe, well, is a pretty powerful device for any atheist. Religions do this on behalf of their adherents, but to an atheist, they are burdened with doing this for themselves. And hence, when you don't do this, you will most likely succumb to nihilism. Now, years ago, I was listening to a teachings company course on death. There were 20 some odd lectures in that course, and one of the lectures spoke about a Buddhist monk. And this Buddhist monk, well, Buddhism being atheist, if you don't split too many hairs, however, it's practiced in such a manner externally, atheistically. So this monk summarized the practice of Buddhism quite succinctly. He said, "One ought to live as if God is real." Now, it is only in the elevation of something to a form of divinity, a myth, can the world fragment itself into sacred and profane objects. This can be seen as the practical, everyday benefit to leading a religious life and the source of guidance for a man leading the religious life. Hence, one needs to replicate such a phenomenon in the atheistic life to retain the benefits, even if one foregoes God himself. So Aenga writes, a central theme in many mythic origins is an archetypical struggle of order against chaos, which I briefly mentioned earlier. This theme exists on a practical as well as a spiritual level, as it is the purpose of civilization to separate what is human and inhuman, us and them, certainty and uncertainty. In such myths, the struggle of order against chaos forms the central conflict. So indeed, the struggle between order and chaos appears as a theme pretty much everywhere. If we've been paying attention the last few years, Jordan Peterson pretty much built his entire career on studying this struggle. Yet the nature of the myth itself is not really the message, is it? No, the message is the world-shaping power of a myth elevated to divinity. The author writes, only as a facsimile or as a recreation myth creates an ethereal or legendary atmosphere wherein the world is full of miracles, heroes, magic, and glory, anew each time they are experienced, because they occur in mythological time, and mythical time is not restricted by the common accounting of time. The guidance that Aenga is trying to author is to bring the magic back into your life. An atheistic, materialistic world itself is absent magic. One must inject it back into reality to reinvigorate existence with that which has been lost. This is the purpose of this section of the book. Naturally, the book itself, conducts far more exposition than what I am authoring, but this should suffice to explain, these concepts as I see them for this review. Now, the next key section occurs much later, with a good deal of exposition governed around morality itself. So let's start with the text. Quote, I do not espouse an absolute prescriptive moral standard for human behavior, a normative morality which is applied to all humans, whether by themselves or by an external existence, such as was described in the world as an artifact worldview. What can be said is that different people hold different codes of conduct, which can be said to summarize their patterns of behavior. But the question remains, how does one determine which morality is best? End quote. Now, the author answers this question in two ways. One answer is his answer for himself. The second answer is the generalized answer, namely, go forth and roll your own values with his guidance. The book at this stage is running two parallel paths of discourse. The first path is spelling out the, Dungeons & Dragons style player's handbook the reader is meant to reference to organize their own life, while the second path is Aenga using the rules he is presenting to give exposition to the character he is creating with this framework of his for his own life, which is pretty fun to observe. Now, Aenga's answer for himself, if I were to kind of summarize it in a quick and dirty way, would ground his moral system in the following foundational belief. People always act in what is their perceived self-interest. Aenga explicitly names himself a moral relativist. Consequent to this, it is not the intention of the author to impose any specific belief upon the reader, but to encourage value and belief creation within the reader, for himself, by himself. Aenga states that he states this early in his book, but further refines the thinking over 100 pages. On page 22, we get this section, let's quote it outright here. Quote, you choose what you believe. You are the final authority on your perspectives, beliefs, and actions. Again, exposition came much later, but this was stated early. And this statement is fleshed out, in the book as indicates that moral weight is voluntary. that the agent asserts a weight to a moral judgment from their own subjective perspective. Furthermore, the perspective is particular to the individual and not a culture. Consequent to this, Aenga's moral relativism prioritizes the individual as the source of their moral system. In short, morality is relative to the individual, and no higher order social structure like family, community, or nation really has much to say. Now, moral relativism is a 20th century phenomenon for the most part. The traditional position was that of moral skepticism. Now, moral skepticism was an offshoot of general epistemological skepticism as practiced by the Pyrrhonists in Greece, for example. Moral skepticism threw doubt on the possibility of knowledge of moral values. Hence, no moral value, could confidently be said to carry moral weight under those views. Moral relativism, it's a little different. Moral relativism grants moral weight to different moral systems, even contradictory ones. The possibility of attributing moral weight to a value and its opposite simultaneously, be it in two separate moral systems, is a challenge for moral relativists to tackle in general. And like I said, moral relativism is a 20th century invention for all intents and purposes, and is not philosophically established as compared to something like moral absolutism or moral skepticism. Hence, in the case of Aenga's work, it is expected to encounter people with contradictory moral systems as well as similar moral systems whose ranking of moral weight differ across similar judgments. Not everybody would accept this, but that is part of the text. Much like the atheistic ontology of this work, so too is moral relativism the underpinning meta-ethical position taken here. And consequent to this, following Aenga's rules for value creation necessarily carries all burdens associated with moral relativism along with any benefits. So, the author writes, "You create a description about your morality rather than a normative statement of morality itself. That is, you do not claim that a code of conduct is absolutely true, as the observable world is said to be absolutely true. This begins with the valuation of an action being derived from its consequences, and given there exist no normative moral actions or consequences, only moral interpretations of actions and consequences. It ends with that which is desirable or good being beneficial to achieve your definition of personal excellence, and that which is bad is detrimental to the realization of your ambitions in life." Page 139. Now, this quote captures a part of the meta-ethical position expressed in the work. The section governing morality is, fairly extensive and would need to be read in its entirety to fully understand the author's position. And like any text tackling substantive subjects, summaries don't really have the capacity to capture the breadth of meaning, but serve merely to position a view on a map. So, for the purposes of this review, I am simply anchoring the reader's expectation of contemplations in a moral relativistic meta-ethical system. Quote, "I approach the question of the correct method to achieve my ends from meta-ethical moral relativism, meaning the truth or falsity of moral judgments or their justifications is not absolute or universal, but is relative to the traditions, convictions, or practices of the appraising agent described in greater detail in the section Subjective Morality." So here Aenga is referring back to something he spoke earlier in the text. Now, armed with the tool of awareness of the belief framework one exists is coupled with a framework for value creation. Contemplations fundamentally leaves the reader to their own device in moral crafting. Now, I think this is the big takeaway from this work. You're mostly on your own to craft the world around you. So given this reality, it is wise to arm yourself with tools to help you navigate the landscape you find yourself in and do the best you can to get the most out of the life that you want. The subtitle of the book, A Different Path to the Sacred, itself is a summary of the book. The book lays out a path to the creation of a sacral manifestation in one's own life. Hence, in my opinion, the primary mission is still what I said earlier, one of overcoming nihilism. The message of the book in general is positive, it's constructive, as in attempting to give hope in the face of hopelessness. Now, this positive thesis, much like in Nietzsche's work, takes the form of bursts of romanticism in language. And as we know, the purpose of the 18th century Romantic movement, after all, was to advocate for the importance of subjectivity, among other things, but definitely that. So while reading Contemplations, you will often encounter, well, outbursts from the author such as, quote, "Only in the determination of the self, which is shed of all trappings, not of virtue, to ruin or to glory, will be emblazoned upon his breast through the greatest trial ever, to be undergone. Can he truly avow with his heart aflame with the same searing fire eternal, I am? Or, I do not need to believe in the idea of a divinity. I see the beatific vision every day when the sun rises. I hear the birds singing. Their melodies are as the words of divinity. I smell the scent of fallen leaves upon the air in autumn. It is the breath of the innermost workings of the ultimate being. Whichever way I look at whatever it might be, no matter the valuation given by humanity, there is the face of God." Now, Nietzsche's influence is clearly present in such passages, as Nietzsche was prone to such outbursts himself. In fact, I would say that thus spoke Zarathustra. If I were to give it a stylistic review, I would call it one long romantic outburst. Contemplations, however, is a little more tame in this respect than the works of Nietzsche. And honestly, thank God for that, because Nietzsche could get a little bit out of hand sometimes, to the point that you just kind of roll your eyes at some of his language. But to summarize, Contemplations, A Different Path to the Sacred, can be said to be a sort of guidebook. A guidebook attempting to walk someone out of the trappings of nihilism that, well, an atheistic ontology has a bad habit of creating. The work itself is rooted in a Spinoza-like objective idealism with materialistic tendencies coupled with moral relativism to round out the solution. The work itself, well, is ambitious and broad. It is not a systematic treatise. It's also fairly long, clocking in at about 330 pages. It belongs to the continental tradition as opposed to the analytical tradition of philosophy, if that distinction matters to you. But more importantly, who is this book for? Now, I had a brief exchange with the author around this subject. To me, it seems like it's for atheists struggling with nihilism. And I sent an email to Aenga, and his response to me was similar in my interpretation, but we'll just read it outright. The audience who might be best served by this book are not necessarily atheists, but those who are seeking a path. It would be most helpful for those who are struggling with nihilism, but if someone were on the road to do it as well, it would be helpful, especially in the West, where fewer and fewer people are religious, but do identify as spiritual. So there we have it. Contemplations, A Different Path to the Sacred by Aenga Besceawung. Link to the audiobook and the Amazon page are in the description, guys, so check it out. Also, TFM had conducted his own review of this book as well. He has closer connections to Aenga. TFM's review is really entertaining, so I very much encourage you to watch that as well. And thank you, Aenga, for sharing this book with me. It was a pleasure to read. And thank you all for listening. Go team.